This is going to be, I think, a very exciting hour and a half for all of us. I want to begin with a shout out to Shireen Tawfiq, who is the program producer and understands all the electronic wizardry that makes this all work so smoothly. Just briefly, how the evening is going to go. For the first half hour, we're going to share who we are as part of our membership meeting. Then at 7 o'clock, we'll shift to our main event, which is navigating the changing workforce environment. More about that at 7 in about 30 minutes. So let's begin. Who are we? Many people say, what is Women of Peace Corps Legacy? Well, we are a community of several hundred of those who have had or have now some affiliation with Peace Corps. We can be volunteers, return volunteers, staff, former staff. Wait a minute, I have a great speech and I just lost it. Wait a minute. Okay, here we go. We've staff, former staff, supporters, host country partners. We further professional and personal development for our members and others, such as we are doing this evening. And in doing so, draw on what has been gained from the Peace Corps experience. We use cross-generational connections to support and encourage as we navigate service domestically and globally. For the past 3 years, our programming and committee activities have been virtual, to which we hope to add in-person social activities once or twice a year. All right, how do we keep all this going? We all volunteer. Managing Women of Peace Corps Legacy activities around the edges of full-time work, families, households, travel, and technology. Why? We care about helping create opportunities for women, to mentor women, opening service opportunities for women and girls. It's why I have been involved with Women in Peace Corps Legacy for these past several years. We have 4 officers, 2 co-presidents, a secretary, and a treasurer. This is our fiduciary board. We also have an advisory committee, the group that suggests, clears, cheers, and supports our ongoing overall activities and those of the committees. The advisory group meets once a month. We strive to have our officers, advisory committee, and committee chairs represent the different decades of service, younger and older, and the rich diversity of those activities in the Peace Corps community. For example, Megan Celestine and I serve as co-presidents, and we certainly definitely represent different decades of Peace Corps service. I represent one of those older decades. Megan isn't active with us tonight as she is caring for her 10-day-old Lucas. Congratulations, Megan. We have 5 committees, as you see on the slide: fundraising, mentoring, outreach, and events, awards, and communication. I will describe the fundraising committee and then hand it over to our treasurer, Erin Gibbs, for the treasurer's report. Erin will then hand it to Lynn Needler, who will outline the awards, communication, and OEC committees. Included will be many opportunities for each of you to get involved, which is very easy to do. At 7 p.m., we'll shift to tonight's program, being introduced by Elizabeth Neeson, the chair of our mentoring committee. All right, to begin, our fundraising committee. Because we all are volunteers and mostly interact virtually, the Women of Peace Corps Legacy expenses are minimal, thank goodness. Thus, our important fundraising is for our 2 awards, which you will hear about in a moment. Our fundraising team has successfully raised the majority of resources for our long-term commitment to the awards, $30,000 for each of the awards. We hope to raise the rest in 2023 We will also look down the road.
And FBI, Andrew Weissman, he worked with Jackson, I think.
Look down the road for other award opportunities as fundraising efforts go well. Now to the treasurer's report. Erin.
Hello, everyone. As Jody mentioned, my name is Erin Gibbs, and I'm the treasurer of Women in Peace Corps Legacy. I've been in this role for a little over a year now, RPCV in Macedonia, and then I was a staff member of Peace Corps for a number of years. And I won't take too much of your time, but as Jody mentioned, this year was a really exceptional year for fundraising, and thanks to the work of the fundraising committee, we received donations this past year of around approximately $20,750, which was, I think the most we've raised in 1 year since WPCL was founded. And that was due in part to two anonymous matching donors who matched up to $5,000 each for our 2 awards. So that was very exciting. So currently we have Women in Peace Corps Legacy as assets of approximately $64,000. And those are split between our Kate Raftery Emerging Leader Award, which has designated funds of around $19,000. The Deborah Harding Women of Achievement Award has around $25,000, and then the rest is undesignated funds that we can use to put on different events and other things that are priorities for the year. And as Jody mentioned, our expenses, thankfully, especially now that we've done the past few years things virtually, are fairly minimal. And so we only had around, we brought in around $20,000 last year, almost $21,000, and only had expenses of around $3,000. And those are just kind of operating, keep the lights on, insurance, PO box, website. And the majority of that actually goes to the awards, because you'll hear more about this later, but each of our award recipients are able to designate donations to either a Peace Corps partnership project or another NGO of their choice. And so that's where the majority of our funds go. So really exciting year. And so if people are interested in joining the fundraising committee and helping us grow those numbers even more, let us know. And now I'll turn it over to Lynn, who will talk about the rest of our committees.
Here. Thank you, Erin, very much. There are 3 other committees that haven't been talked about that Jody mentioned are the Outreach and Events Committee, Communications Committee, and also the Awards Committee. So let me just begin with the OEC, or the Outreach and Events Committee. And as you can imagine, that we organize events, and we try to get as much the broad and deepen the outreach of the organization as much as we can. And the Outreach and Events Committee, promotes outreach efforts to increase WPCL's membership and also our partnerships with organizations and groups that complement our mission and our goals. The committee also creates opportunities to build relationships and encourage discussions to strengthen the WPCL community. One of the things that we have recognized that is quite unique to WPCL is the opportunity for cross-generational connections. And that's one thing that we try to promote in all of our different events. The committee meets the first Monday of every month. New members are always encouraged to join us. And there will be the information for me and for Shireen on a slide. So you'll be able to reach one of us. Also, that's also available on the website. And do remember to keep in touch with the website. The past events that we had this year, which are really exciting, are all recorded, and they're on the website for you to take a look at. What we do is determine the focus of events. Some events during the year are specific to topical things. We did both Ukraine and Afghanistan this year. We had a meetup event in person in May at Winter Garden, and we're going to do the same again this spring. So you'll be able to join us up here in the Washington, D.C. area for a meet and greet at Winter Garden. And then we had a holiday party and this membership meeting, which are both virtual. We not only do we plan the events, but we execute them. And as Jody said, when she said something about Shireen at the top of the meeting, Shireen is organizing all of the tech and all of the background. So part of what our committee does is make sure that we plan and execute the events that we do. So if anybody's interested in joining, we would love to have you. And if you have those kind of skills, we'd be delighted to have you share it with us. The awards committee is another committee that is really exciting. And this year we actually have the awards event as our October event for the Outreach and Events Committee. There are two events which were mentioned earlier. One is the Corella, which is the Kate Raftery Early Leader Award for women under the age of 40 who are emerging leaders. And that goes with a stipend award that they can give to an organization that focuses on empowering women and girls. Check the website out for when those applications will be available for people, and do keep thinking about who you might nominate for that. The other is the Deborah Harding Women of Achievement Award. Deborah was one of the very, very early women in Peace Corps, insisting that women be integrated in all aspects of Peace Corps, not only management, but also to make sure that they were part of the volunteer force early on. The committee's work, the awards committee work, is focused and it's seasonal. They're given out at that special award. So your work with that committee is roughly pretty more intense between April and October, which is the busiest time. And you'll solicit nominations and process the nominations, select the winners, and arrange the awards, and work very closely with the OEC committee on putting up and in producing and planning the event. So they welcome you, both Pam and Sue welcome you to join that committee. The Communications Committee, as it sounds, is really responsible for the outward sort of face of WPCL. It promotes our work. The committee expanded our impact on social media. We diversified a lot of our digital communications. They work really, really hand in glove with all the other committees. So anything that the awards committee plans, it will then be supported by communications, the same with all the other committees. Our members and our other partner organizations and wider communities find our programs of interest, and we'd like you to join us in any of the committees that would really suit your skills and suit your interest. An exciting thing is coming up in March. I want to give you a little shout out to the fact that on March the 2nd, we're going to have the recently confirmed director of the Peace Corps, Carol Spahn, who is going to be speaking. Jody will be interviewing her, who's going to be speaking about, she's going to be speaking about her trajectory in leadership, women in the Peace Corps, and sort of the future of Peace Corps and what is happening with Peace Corps now. So it's going to be very exciting. It'll be on March the 2nd. And that's also going to kick off Women's History Month, as you know. So if you have any questions, please reach out to those of us on the committees. We encourage your participation. We solicit creative ideas, and particularly speaking from a person who was in Tanzania in 1965, I welcome people with really good technical skills, because it's clearly missed my generation somewhere. We didn't even have, I called my parents once in 3 years or something back in the day, so things have changed significantly. I'd like now to turn over, if I could please, this evening to Elizabeth, and it's going to happen with the rest of our evening's presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Lynn. And thank you to everyone this evening who's joining us. My name is Elizabeth Neeson, and I am one of the co-chairs of the Mentoring Committee. The Mentoring Committee has had much success over the past few years, matching willing mentors to mentees that are members of the We at Peace Corps affinity group at Peace Corps headquarters, and WE stands for Women's Empowerment. Last year, we had 16 mentee matches, and the year before we had, I believe it was approximately 25. Last year saw growth in the numbers of new mentors willing to participate, which was very exciting. We also saw increased diversity in the mentor group, and we also had a diverse area of work fields in different sectors where our mentors engage. We are pleased to be offering the mentoring program again this year. We will be sending out the call for both mentors and mentees looking at the end of February, beginning of March. We will review all of the applications that come in on both sides and begin the matching process by the end of March. Overall, the mentoring period lasts for about 3 months, and we ask for a minimum of 5 mentoring conversations. The first one is more of a get to know you, and then the 3 meetings that are set up according to the mentoring pair schedules. And then we also have a final wrap-up session. And then we have, as I said in the beginning, is more of a get to know you and a larger meeting for all of the mentees, as well as that closing ceremony. And we are delighted to be offering the program this evening, Navigating the Changing Work Environment. And with this, I would like to hand it back to Dr. Jody Olson, the co-president of Women of Peace Corps Legacy, who will serve as the facilitator this evening. Over to you, Jody. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Let me put another little piece in before we actually come to the program very briefly. When Lynn was talking about the programming and particularly that and the communication activities, I want to note that we're looking to expand our newsletter and to begin to build a series of podcasts and possibly even some blog posts. And that way we can continue to feature women and women leaders and activities that are happening and women are facilitating throughout the world. With that, I want to put, yes, one more plug to get involved, because any of you who are interested in helping facilitate particularly the podcasts and or blog activity that we're going towards, get in touch with the head of communications and or the head of the OEC committee, because they're the ones that are putting this together. And I think it gives us a chance to expand our work. We have these wonderful programs, but we want to sort of make ourselves present even between the times of the programs and be able to feature more exciting work that women are doing here and around the world. So just a little plug for what our new activities are going to be for this coming year, in addition to what we're doing. Okay, now we'll switch over to Women of Peace Corps Legacy's Navigating the Changing Work Environment. And we're thrilled that we have 2 presenters this evening to talk to us about this and to answer questions. So we will meet with our 2 presenters, and then following that, we'll have 20 to 25 minutes towards the end of the program to answer for our presenters to answer any questions that you have. So beginning even now, you can put questions you have in the chat box, and we will answer as many as we can as we move towards the top of the hour of 8 o'clock. The good news is that we're ahead of schedule, so hopefully this will give us plenty of time for the conversations that we're going to have. We're lucky to have 2 presenters or discussants this evening, Hope Johnson and Dennis Diamond. Hope is going to talk primarily about navigating the current future of the workforce. Dennis will then discuss the federal government workforce, not in detail, but he'll give a little overview of the workforce and how to become part of that workforce. And he's going to do a special piece concentration on non-competitive eligibility. And for any returning Peace Corps volunteers who have that non-competitive eligibility, here's your chance to really see it and know it firsthand. Dennis is an expert. But first, excitedly, I want to introduce Hope Johnson. Hope and I have known each other for, well, let's just say a lot of years.
Yes.
And I take advantages of your skills, Hope, for many, many years. But Hope began her professional career as a Peace Corps volunteer in Malaysia. And I have to say, when I was regional director, I was the one that closed Malaysia down. So I was the one who sort of took your country off the Peace Corps map. But I got to go there, and it's a fabulous country. After Hope returned, she worked for executive search firms for a decade and then launched her own search company, Pyramind. which she has now owned and led for over 2 decades. So not only is Hope going to talk to us, about work and getting jobs in this environment, but for any of you who are interested, what it's like to own or run a company, because Hope has done it beautifully for over 2 decades. She works for global nonprofit and for-profit companies, seeing ways that the Peace Corps experience adds workforce value. Pyramind is a retained executive search firm hired by organizations that are looking for leaders. Their focus is in finding the new organization leaders. Although Hope's firm has focused on senior leadership recruitment, she tonight is going to be sharing the comments and threads that we all are negotiating for professionals as we're professionals seeking new opportunities. So with that, Hope, I welcome you.
Thank you.
I know we have a few questions, and I have a few questions for you that I really appreciate. So are you ready to go?
Go ahead, let's do it.
Okay, here we go. We know this conversation is important now. We've all come through the pandemic, or finishing coming through the pandemic. For a whole host of reasons, and many related to the pandemic, the workforce is really changing and has changed. And so let me begin by asking you, what are some of the changes that you have seen in the workforce?
Sure, thank you, Jody. It's such a pleasure to be here and to speak with Peace Corps returned Peace Corps volunteers who have a part of my heart always. So the demand for senior talent has strengthened over the past 6 months to a year. And part of this, and the demand for executive search firms, and part of this is due to people retiring. Part of this is due to people not returning to the workforce. And part of this is actually also due to a number of industries that are really growing very rapidly. That includes technology, manufacturing, hospitality, healthcare, to name a few. So what people can expect in the workforce right now, there are a couple of trends that are they're sort of emerging. First of all, non-traditional recruiting efforts are being utilized more than ever. Part of that is the focus on finding the right fit for the organization. And what I mean by non-traditional recruiting efforts, for example, executive search firms are used more than ever because we, like other people like myself, uncover passive candidates who are not necessarily looking for jobs. So job boards, yes, will still be used, but there's also going to be other tactics being used. So be aware of that. It should be, so don't turn down a call from a recruiter of any kind or an outreach. The other top recruiting trends, let's talk about remote work for a moment. All the workers want remote work. However, Hunt Scanlon, a publication that comes out with recruiting trends every year, noted that only 15% of jobs in the US right now are remote. So that means that when you look at your next job, you need to look at what the work environment is that you want to work in. So many employers and employees are saying, we want to go back to the office. Along with that, there are performance issues. You may yourself have heard about some employees that are doing 2 or 3 remote jobs at one time. So while I think remote work is here to stay, there will be some conditions with that, and you need to be prepared for that. We sent out 2 offers this year, along with some of my other recruiting colleagues, that were different. If you wanted to come into the office full time, you received this amount of money and all this benefit. If you wanted a hybrid, it was reduced. If you wanted remote, it was reduced even more. Be prepared for things like that in the future, not 100%, but it will not be uncommon. The automated AI recruiting is on the up. So that means, especially with large companies, you will probably be first screened through a robot. The way to get around that is to look for keywords that that organization is looking, and make sure that your resume or the data points that you're putting in there match what that organization is looking for. That will become more and more common. Some other recruiting trends are gig work. So people are not doing full-time jobs now. Some employers are saying, we're going to outsource these jobs. That means we don't have to sort of work around the remote issue. We'll have project-based work. So that is on the up. So those are some of the key trends that you'll see. Virtual interviews are on the rise. You'll see that more and more. And a lot of the technology, the robot recruiting is definitely on the rise. The other thing is diversity and inclusion will be very important, but there's a different twist on diversity. I think it's really about equity across the board. You're seeing more and more employers looking at older employees, and I'm talking about 60 plus, and also looking at younger employees, maybe under 20. So a lot of community colleges are training people at a younger age, and they're going into the workforce. So you will see a broad range of diversity, and it's not what I would say that the typical suspects. You'll see also that women are competing against women now. So you need to keep that in mind as you are in the workforce. So I'll pause there. Jody, is there anything else you want to augment to that, or does that?
Yeah, I want to just note again, you said 15% of the jobs are remote. And so what it creates is, however, and I think you gave some really good examples of that, but there's a real negotiation between those of us who are looking and those of us who are hiring. And, and I just think about all the ways we've gotten used to being home more. And it can be an uncomfortable dynamic trying to sort that out going forward, because it's ultimately the employer who offers the job. Correct.
I'm not saying that there is no remote work, but I think, again, if I remember the statistics from Hunt Scanlon, it was something like 80% of all employees wanted remote work. So that's a huge differential from the fact that there's really only about 15% of full-time remote jobs. Does that mean they're none? No. But Jody, you really put the nail on the head. You have to think very clearly about why do you want remote? What does that mean for you? And if a company has we know companies who've come back and said, this is our new culture. Our new culture is we want everyone in the office 8 to 5, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So what that means is you can't say I only want to be in Friday and Monday, because they've decided this is how their culture is. And so if that doesn't work for you, then just be honest with yourself, I guess is what I'm saying. But Jody is right. There's a little bit of a push and pull right now. The advantage is it allows you to define what you want for yourself, but also be aware that not every employer is just carte blanche giving remote work. And there are some conditions with it. You will see performance metrics go sky high over the next couple of years, tightened up watching what you're doing, especially if you're remote work. I mean, I've had several conversations with HR people over the past couple of weeks, and the monitoring of what people are doing is being tightened up is the only word I can think of right now.
I want to just pick up on one of your other items of women competing against women. I think we're all aware of it abstractly, but you get to see it in real terms. When I was at the University of Maryland, before I came back to Peace Corps the last time, all of the professional schools that I was working with, from dentistry, law, medicine, nursing, pharmacy, and social work, all had more women than men. some significantly more women than men. And it was a suggestion, a real world suggestion to me of how many more women are going into so many different professional areas that we thought of as even being more male dominated. And those of you who are working with Peace Corps, you are also recognizing the number of volunteers coming in are more likely to women. We all know that the number of graduates and PhD recipients are more women. So we're working in a world where we are competing with each other because we're taking it over. No, I don't want to say it quite like that. we are very strong in the workforce right now. And so we look to each other to help each other, but we also compete with each other. So let me go on to related. What does the current job market look like for some of these leadership positions? And when I say leadership, I mean, people who run projects, who are in management positions, who are team leaders, as well as maybe COOs or CEOs. But so much of our work is leadership, even on a small scale or a big scale. What does the market look like right now?
Well, the market is strong. As I mentioned, it's strengthened over the past year. As you're looking for a job, very creative as to how you look at your work and what you want to perceive. Let me answer this question in a different way. I want to talk about the pros and cons of what a Peace Corps experience will bring. And I think that will answer your question in another way. So as a Peace Corps volunteer, and as I've talked to some organizations over the course of recruiting. I've talked to organizations who speak very highly of hiring return Peace Corps volunteers. And I've talked to other organizations who don't have as many positive things to say about it. So let me highlight some of those for a minute. The pros are that return Peace Corps volunteers are highly entrepreneurial, very hands-on, results-oriented, and mission-focused. And what that means is you are used to going in and accomplishing something probably with nothing, no money, no resources, can't speak the language, no problem, I can do this, which is great. So the flip side of that, however, is that some organizations feel that Peace Corps volunteers never left their country mentally, that they can exhibit that in their dress, in how they communicate, in even some of the cultural connotations and fitting in. And so while on the one hand, they're team players, on the other hand, they're being told that they're so used to accomplishing things by themselves that they're not team players. So there's a thin edge there. The other thing is their presence. Sometimes we've heard companies talk about people coming in as if they're still living in their country. And they're not as adjusting to, I guess, not just the culture of that particular organization. So I would say that the job market is strong, but bear those traits in mind and think very carefully about how you're presenting yourself as a returned Peace Corps volunteer, because not everybody understands the experience and not everybody appreciates it. So all of us, can laud the experience from one, a tall building to another, but not everybody sees it that way. So keep that in mind. Anticipate what the hiring manager might ask you. But I do think the opportunities are there for sure. Many companies are growing globally, and so it's a good time to look in that respect for people coming back.
That's exciting to hear, but it's disappointing to think that employers don't necessarily laud every return Peace Corps volunteer experience. I'm teasing, but but what's important is that how can you, let's say you are a returned Peace Corps volunteer at this point, how do you turn those experiences or how you want to represent those experiences into assets as you are presenting yourself either in writing or in person, particularly for somebody who doesn't know much about Peace Corps or thinks of it in some of those ways that they don't see helpful to the organization. How can we frame it to make it a real asset?
Sure. So there are a couple of things that you can do. Let's take it one job at a time versus speaking globally. So if you are looking versus speaking generically, so if you are looking at a particular job that you might be interested in, I would actually take the position description and pull it apart, meaning what are the skill sets that they're looking for? Let's say they're looking for communication skills. Okay, I'm not going to say entrepreneurial, that's too easy, but let's say communication skills. So highlight how your experience as a Peace Corps volunteer strengthened your communication skill. That does not mean you can speak another language, okay? Because that's not going to be necessarily that valuable to your employer, your potential employer. How is your communication experience as a Peace Corps volunteer going to be valuable to the employer that you are looking for a job with? So it really means taking apart that position and digging into exactly how your experience will measure up. While you're doing that, you need to do your homework in depth about that company. And that means to read their financials, to read their annual report, look at their feeds that are coming out on social media, on their events, look at how they're presenting themselves, get a drift of their particular culture. Look at, even put a binder together, look at their board directors, do your homework, but break apart the position so that you're aligned with how they're communicating about themselves and you're beginning to speak in their terms as well. It's almost as if you were going into another country and how you adapt it, but you need to do this in terms of a particular company. Ask yourself, what are you bringing to this organization? What can you contribute to them? How are you helping them solve a problem? Not, I'm just phenomenal, you got to hire me. The position is open because they have a problem to solve. No position is just a complete refill or a complete replacement. There's always a reason that a position was open. And you look at that, sort of figure out what that reason is, or take a good guess at it, and how you can solve a problem for them. So do your homework, take apart the position, align your skills with that organization, and solve a problem for them.
That's terrific. Let me just staying with it, because I know as people who have had Peace Corps experience, what does that look like in the job market, particularly when people don't know? Just a very quick example, when I was talking to a group of deans of graduate school and those who were reviewing for people to come to graduate school, they just universally said, we love to have returned Peace Corps volunteers and we love to hire them in our graduate school programs. And I asked why. What made the Return Peace Corps volunteer special? And they said, because they're willing to do anything. They're willing to solve a problem. They're willing to solve it without knowing enough of the information if the information's not there. They don't complain. They just get in and do it. And I was thinking, that's really practical. But so as a lot of the traits that potential employers are looking for, some of them that I think we can talk about bringing to the table are problem solving, and problem solving when it's an unusual situation or one where there's not enough information in the beginning. We can also talk about having tried all sorts of different ways of doing something and digging in and just getting it done. We can talk about teams. We can talk about listening. We can talk about, building partnerships. So there's a lot of those words that really come from 2 years of experience that I think reframes some of that conversation from, oh, you were just out there and you work on your own, because I think a lot of what we bring is really the antithesis of that.
Yeah, that's true. But it's up to you as a potential employee to put that together.
Yeah, and that's key.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have to assume that the person we're talking to really doesn't know anything about Peace Corps.
Correct. Yes, correct.
And we
You-
have to get there first before they say, oh, I don't want that.
absolutely.
We're talking about the highly competitive market, employment market. What are some of the ways that you can maneuver as you're looking into job searches? How can you maneuver this market for your own benefit?
Well, there's a couple of things. You need to be very creative in how you look for a job, for one thing. As I mentioned, not just job boards. You need to network. Network is critical. And actually, I remember when I worked at Peace Corps many years ago, one of the, and I cannot remember her name, told me all you need to go is go to a networking event and meet one person. That's all you need. So you need to keep that in mind. One critical person, but the networking will be critical. Creative thinking about where to find jobs. So again, not just relying on job boards, trying to get in front of recruiters, going to events where you're going to meet some of the people who potentially could hire you, even though they may not have a job, meeting them. Those kinds of things are going to be very, very critical and very useful to you in looking for another job. I want to highlight also along those lines, we have identified 5 traits that we've seen that candidates stand out when we have positions that are highly, highly competitive. We sit down and ask ourselves, so why did this person get it and this person didn't? And we highlighted 5 characteristics, and you can keep these in mind as you're looking. Impact. And that would be, what is the impact that you've made on other organizations? And how can you describe that when you're talking about yourself? That is not your accomplishments. It's the impact that you made on an organization. And oftentimes in an interview, I will ask people, describe to me the situation where you think you made the biggest impact on an organization. So think about your impact. Number 2, innovative. And again, this does not necessarily mean I went to Africa and built a bridge. Okay, that is innovative and you used innovative skills. But innovative is back to the problem solving. What have you done that was a little bit different in helping to solve a problem? Resilience and adaptability. So this means really how did you come back from something that wasn't necessarily good? So yes, your Peace Corps experience is very vital, but some employers may not understand that. So adaptability is also how did you overcome something that took you back a few steps? Resource development. Every organization, no matter whether it's nonprofit or for-profit, is interested in money. They want to make more money in some way, shape, or form. So if you can speak in terms of dollars and cents and how you can bring money into an organization, that will get you a lot of points. And the final one is probably the most important, and that is motivation. What is your motivation for the job? Not, I'm so wonderful, you should hire me, but how motivated am I for the job? We have seen this over and over and over again. When a candidate maybe even has the least amount of skills, however, exhibits the most interest in the position, I want to say more than 80% of the time gets a job. So your motivation, it has to be genuine and it has to be real. How you exhibit that and how it comes off to the employer will be really critical. Understanding those traits and how you position your resume and how you position your conversation will put you ahead of the game.
Do you want to just list those words again, just in case people
Sure.
are getting again?
Impact, innovation, resilience and adaptability, resource development, and motivation.
Terrific. I'm going to shift the question just a tad at this point, because many of us here have had some experiences already in the job market, and we're at a point where we're saying, I would love to do something a little different, or I would like to take my talent and put it in a different place, or work in a different kind of an environment. So you're now wanting to get a job, but let's just say your background or your resume doesn't look just like that job you want to get. You want to shift a bit. How do you take your background? How do you take the experience you've had and reframe it to make yourself just that perfect person for something that's a little different than what you've been doing in the past?
So the first thing is to make it very clear that that's what you're doing. So if that's your objective, I want to work in a nonprofit that works on water conservation, you need to say that right up front, even if you're working in a manufacturing company right now. So that's number one. Be very clear about where you're going. Not, oh, I might want to work in water environment, or, yeah, I could work in homelessness, or you need to be very, very, very clear. That's number one. Number two is, once you've identified, and you can have more than one, but again, understand your audience. If you're talking to people in water, you don't want to talk about homelessness, right? You want to talk about why you want to get into the water environment or conservation. So also educate yourself immersely. Again, understand their words that they use, the professional groups that they like to join. Immerse yourself in that particular culture of that industry. And then you begin to piece your resume together using those words and using those skill sets that are important to them. Back to what I said earlier, read the organizations, the industries, the professional groups, read their annual reports, read their newsletters, follow their news feeds, follow them on LinkedIn, follow them on Instagram, understand what's important to them, and then begin to build your resume and your talking points around those elements. But be very clear about what your objective is, because I have interviewed people who have wanted to shift gears, but they're all over the place. Like, I don't want to work in manufacturing anymore, but I could do this and maybe that. And I'm like, okay, well, that's just, help me out here a little bit. So I think clarity of your goals, understanding the culture the industry that you want to go into, and aligning your resume and your talking points to the talking points that are important to them.
And which is really important, because I think many of us do want to make some of these shifts. And what I appreciate is you said, be really clear about what you want to shift to, because the person you're talking with is saying, I wonder why this person is here. For you to be able to say that up front, why you're there, is important. And with that is why I want to make this shift.
Yep.
Something happened to me that I really want to go into water resources now. And this is what happened that really puts me wanting to do that. Second, I think that picks up on what you said, is that a lot of jobs have generic skills. And let's say you've been doing a fair amount of finance and you want to shift from manufacturing to a nonprofit human development, something that you take what that core finance skill is and you put different words on it when you're talking to the person. And that I think that sometimes team building skills and management or supervising covers so many different areas. And what you said, I think really well, Hope, is you use a different language, but you're talking about some of those same core skills.
Yes. Again, you have to do the work to communicate to the potential employer. It's just like when people call me and they do the same thing. Well, I want to shift. And I might have a job that they would be good for. But if they can't talk to me, I'm not going to do the work for them, because we have other candidates. So, I mean, so the skills are valuable. Jody is correct. But you need to be the one who drives the communication on that, not reversed. So.
Here, we all wonder, and so here it goes for you. What are some common lessons learned in applying for jobs?
So I will talk to you on this, on some of the lessons learned and some of the common, I hate to use the word mistakes, but things that we see over and over and over again that candidates do. The first one is talking too much. And I think there is a tendency when you're applying for a job to tell them everything about your background. And I can't blame you. You probably waited a long time. If you work with an executive search firm, it's a very rigorous process. If you've worked with any recruiter. So finally you get in front of the client and you think, wow, I've got to tell them everything. And that is the kiss of death. Because what happens is, and consistently I'm hearing people, you might ask me a question, give me an example. Then the candidate will say, well, I have 2 examples. Well, guess what? We don't hear the second example. So we tuned you out after the first one. So be very careful about talking too much and be very succinct and crisp and to the point. If they ask you for one example, one example. The second thing is dress code. And if you'll notice, Jody and I dressed up tonight. And yeah, exactly. She even has on a pin. So this is very important that you spend time thinking about what you look like on a Zoom video, if, you know, assuming it's a Zoom video, because we are noticing, we're looking at it, and we consistently tell candidates, go to your room, look what the lighting is like. What, you know, you may wear a blue suit in the sunlight and it looks fabulous, but you look in the Zoom video and it doesn't look so good. Look at what people are seeing behind you. Make sure that you look like you prepared for that interview, because it comes off. We have, just like in person, we have just a few seconds to look at you. And so how you appear on your Zoom video will make a huge difference. The time that you spend preparing what you're going to wear on that Zoom video will pay off in spades. And we've actually turned people away because of that. Another issue is your social media. Clean it up. We look at it. And we have people who can go, not me, for $50 or $75, I can hire somebody to do a deep dive into someone's background and look at what they're doing on social media. So we look at it. Absolutely nothing political, nothing, no opinions, no comments. We want to see, I went to this great restaurant Friday night. You should go do it. You should go there. It has Mexican food, yada, yada. Cherry blossoms are beautiful this year. Can't wait to go sledding. That's what we want to see on your social media. Anything else, it can harm you. And people do look, and people do make opinions, and people do judge you by your social media. So clean it up. And we see this is hugely problematic. So on that note, LinkedIn, enhance your profile. Make sure recruiters right now are spending a lot of time finding candidates through LinkedIn. So how you present yourself on LinkedIn is very important. And that includes your picture. So we've seen, I looked at somebody for a woman, and she was in her bikini. I'm like, why? You know, you want a president and CEO job, and, you know, and she could be a very respectable person. I'm not saying she was or she wasn't, but I'm like, why would you do this on, you know, on LinkedIn? Secondly, send thank you notes. Goes really far. I had 2 of my close colleagues told me they did not get a job because they did not write a thank you note. They went back and found out later, and they said, you were the only candidate that did not write a thank you note. Send thank you notes every single time. Finally, do your homework about compensation. Women, sadly, are under the assumption that they are underpaid, and certainly there's certain examples, but there's also, I know 3 industries, more on the, let's just say, in the hospitality, the general hospitality space, some of the subdivisions of hospitality, where women in those particular industries are paid 2 to 3 times more than men. So there are certainly still examples of women being underpaid, but that's not always the case. So do your homework before you go in about the job and understand what a job is paying, because what's happened, because we have pushed for equality in payment, corporations have responded. And so they've done surveys and they know what a job is worth on an open market. And we've had I think in the past year, I had 5 women disnegotiate themselves because they were too demanding and were completely unaware of what the market was. And they actually hurt themselves more than help themselves. So do your homework on this. And finally, in general, if you can get the drift, the more prepared, the better. The more that you do your homework about what the organization is looking for, how you think about why you want the job, what you look like in the interview, all of this will pay off.
Those are really important. I want to just come back to the social media piece for a moment. Let's say you're getting ready to have an interview, maybe by Zoom. I think if you go up on your social media and see what you have yourself and think, I'm going to assume that the person who's interviewing me has done the same thing I'm doing right now. What does that look like? How do I look to that person at this moment with what's on my social media right now? So I think that one is a really important one. They're all very important, but inadvertently, people do so much research on each other now because the opportunity is there of how do we want to be seen, because we're doing it. We're doing it. And I'm not on social media, and I'm not on social media deliberately, because you all know from the past, but it's important that we are sharing ourselves the way we want to share ourselves, and that there's private social medias, but and maybe they'll be okay, but things that we sometimes think are not going to be shared also get shared. So we just need to be very conscious of that.
Wait, let me just clarify something. Private social media can also be found. There is no private social media. So the guys that we can hire to dig deep, and we have done it before, can uncover all of it. So if you think you're on a private, I don't know, my kids are in college and they keep claiming that they create their own little Snapchat, whatever they call it. And I've actually broken into it. So, and I am no tech, trust me, I'm no tech person. So there is no private, and cybersecurity is at its height right now. So there is no private. Just be very, very, very careful of what you're doing on social media. If you are concerned about your social media, about what your responses are, and I'm talking about everything from if somebody makes a political statement, and I don't really care what side, but we're going to look at it. If you go, yes, oh, like it, we're going to look at all of that. Okay, so it's not just that you made the comment, but we're also looking at what you are responding to. So it is viewed and looked at, and you can also get it cleaned up, by the way, if you are concerned about it. So
terrific. I think I'm going to say thank you for the moment, Hope, because it's great. And remember the core pieces of advice as well as a lot of the bigger picture. And Shireen just put your 5 main points on chat. So everyone has that. And just for everyone, as you have questions for Hope, write them in the chat and we'll come and get those in a few minutes. But thank you, Hope. Thanks for your honesty about it. Takes work, but it's worth it. It's worth it. That effort that gets made in terms of getting something that people can be very satisfied with.
Yes, thank you.
So with that, I'm going to shift to Dennis Diamond. Hi, Dennis. And Dennis has become a real expert in the federal government, well, employment in the federal government, and particularly in non-competitive eligibility and that relationship, and a little bit about USA jobs. So Dennis has had 44 years work with the federal government, starting out as a lawyer and then also becoming an HR specialist in different federal agencies, but particularly he has spent over 30 years with USAID, and then he has been with Peace Corps for 7 years. And I loved Dennis the time we had together when we were there at the same time. So he is going to talk to us about non-competitive eligibility and a little bit more in general about USA jobs. So Dennis, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
Okay, I'm so glad that you agreed to join us. So let's start with non-competitive eligibility. Can you give a definition and a description of non-competitive eligibility? What is it?
Well, let's start with what it's not. Most people seem to think that non-competitive eligibility is something that simply allows a federal agency to say, I want you, and now you're hired. And in fact, it's not that. The word competitive in non-competitive eligibility is a bit of a misnomer. There's something called competitive examination in the federal government when somebody's going into the competitive service, and we'll talk about what that is in a minute. And so what you have to keep in mind is that non-competitive eligibility does allow federal agencies, when they choose to use it, and I'll talk about that in a minute also, when they choose to use it, it allows them to bypass some of the competitive examination that US citizens would otherwise go through when they are applying for federal jobs. So again, it's not something that simply says, allows an agency to say, I want you and we're going to hire you. So I mentioned competitive service. So civilian employment in the federal sector is basically divided into 3 services: the senior executive service, which we won't talk about, the competitive service, which we will, and the accepted service. So the accepted service is made up of both positions and categories of people who do not have to utilize the competitive service process. So for example, all lawyers are hired into the accepted service. People with certain disabilities get hired into the accepted service. You, if you were employed by the Peace Corps, being appointed into the Foreign Service was an accepted service appointment. If you were to decide that you wanted to apply for a USAID or State Department Foreign Service job, you would be accepted service and NCE would not be applicable. So the competitive service is the service that most people think about when they think about federal employment. It includes the whole host of jobs. It could be HR jobs, it could be health jobs, it could be financial management jobs. And basically, it's designed around rules that are administered by the Office of Personnel Management that require agencies to do certain things when they're going to hire somebody into the competitive service. The accepted service is much more flexible. So the Peace Corps, as an accepted service agency, can hire however it chooses to within certain parameters, as compared to USAID in the Foreign Service, as compared to the State Department. So when you get to the competitive service, which is really where NCE relates, there are pretty strict rules in terms of the way the federal agencies writ large have to go about hiring, promoting, and retaining individuals in the competitive service. The other thing that I would say is that federal agencies don't have necessarily a very good understanding of NCE. So you can imagine the number of federal agency personnel offices. You know, there are hundreds of them. And they kind of, well, what does this really mean? What are we supposed to do? And actually, Kate Rafferty and I and the then Chico would go over to OPM, trying to get OPM to be a bit more cooperative and to put out greater guidance to federal agencies, because the Peace Corps would often get phone calls from agencies about, well, can we do this? Can we do that? And it's really the responsibility of OPM to make it understood government-wide. We have had minimal success, quite frankly, in that area. So again, keep in mind that NCE is going to be applicable for when somebody applies for a competitive service job. So now how does that happen? So if you go to USA Jobs and you pull up any agency, one of the things you will see when you find a job that you might be interested in is one, it's going to tell you whether it's competitive service or whether it's accepted service. If it's accepted service, again, NCE is not really applicable. They still might be interested in the fact that you were a Peace Corps employee or a Peace Corps volunteer, but it's not in and of itself applicable. So when you look at a competitive service job, one of the things you're going to see is obviously the description of the job, but keep in mind that every agency gets to choose the area of consideration or the hiring path that it wants to take for that particular job. So for example, you go to USA Jobs and you're going to see a bunch of categories or very few categories. It just depends on what that agency decides to do. By categories, I mean, it might say all US citizens. It might say only competitive service employees. It might say competitive service employees, accepted service employees, Peace Corps employees, family member appointees from overseas. So it decides which areas of consideration it wants to utilize for who it's going to be eligible. If you were to go to USA Jobs, and if you, for example, clicked on any one of those buttons, you would see a description of what that button represents. And then you would understand where you might fall into that group of individuals who would be eligible or not. So again, the important thing there is that agencies choose by each individual position how they want to put the position out there and what groups of people they will make eligible to apply for that job. If, for example, you see a job that's really interesting to you and it says competitive service, accepted service, but you don't see anything about, say, Peace Corps, what I would say you should do is pick up the phone and call the HR specialist who's listed on that job announcement and have a discussion with that person to better understand, was it a mistake? Is there a reason why? Is there any way that they can amend or repost the job that would allow for Peace Corps employees who have competitive eligibility to apply? Sometimes that works, doesn't always work, but it's always good to have that discussion so that you can understand what it is that is out there for you, and also to possibly move the ship to get that particular agency to say, oh yeah, we ought to be doing that. So it's important to understand that. If you're interested and you want to see the specific authority for Peace Corps employees, I'm not talking about volunteers right now, for Peace Corps employees, you could Google 5 CFR 315.607. That's the legal authority that OPM has set forth that basically provides NCE for Peace Corps, former Peace Corps employees.
All right, what we'll do is Shireen will put it in the chat.
Okay.
And we're running close on time here. But I think one particular point that you've made, Dennis, is that the way Hope said we have to do the research. You're saying for NCE, we also have to do the research, that each agency and part of agency is sorting it out on its own. It's not a global piece that OPM manages. As a last question, you're now starting the USA Jobs, whether it's NCE or not NCE. Do you have one or two quick items that people should have and keep in mind when they open up USA Jobs and begin to apply for a federal job?
Well, the first thing is you have to make sure that you're going to fit into the group of people who are eligible. So if you are, then what you have to do is you have to be, as Hope was describing in terms of being very forward thinking, you got to be very careful about the way you characterize what your experiences have been relative to the required qualifications. Again, you know, with OPM and federal agencies who are seeking employees, particularly in the competitive service, there's some very specific things that have to be met, and you have to be very careful about how you capture those things and how you characterize them. That also goes to the grade level that you're applying for. So again, in the federal service, you know, you're looking at a job that's a GS 13 or GS 14 or whatever it is, and you're applying against those specific qualifications. And it's not, the grade level is not a negotiation. You get whatever grade you're applying for, and then the dollar amounts might be a negotiation within the steps of that grade. So the federal government has multiple steps, which increase dollar amounts, which could be negotiable. But the grade itself, you're either qualified for that grade or you're not. And
I think we'll stop at this point, but Dennis too is available for follow-up questions. And now we know why it's complex, and I'm glad you gave us a framework for it that hopefully will make it a little bit easier as people negotiate. As I turn it over to Elizabeth to ask you questions for the next 20 minutes, I want to make a special note that Hope Johnson has very, very graciously agreed to spend an hour privately with any of you who would like to spend time with her about preparing for a job or a job search. What's important is she has the skill. It's a wonderful offer. In conjunction with that, you make a donation to Women of Peace Corps Legacy. It gives us a chance to look at our fundraising opportunities, but with a donation to Women in Peace Corps Legacy, Hope is there to spend an individual hour with you. And I want to thank you, Hope, for giving people that particular opportunity. So thank you. With that, extra thank you to Dennis and to Hope, and you're still going to be part of us for the next while. I'm going to turn it to Elizabeth for questions.
Thank you so much, both Hope and Dennis and Jody, for this excellent discussion. And we highly encourage our audience to please post your questions in the chat box. And we do have a question that asks, what if I am not on social media? So Hope, could you address this question? And if there's a general question that could be answered by both Hope and Dennis, we invite you to both respond. Hope, you did talk specifically about social media. So what if a person isn't on social media? Does it hurt them? Does it help them? What are some things you've heard out there in the hiring world?
It doesn't hurt you, but I would strongly encourage them to have a LinkedIn presence, because that's where recruiters are looking. So when I use the word social media generically, I'm talking about LinkedIn, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter. I'm forgetting all of them. But if you're not on any of them, that's probably a positive. But from a job search perspective, being on LinkedIn is probably critical. As long as you're not wearing a bikini in your picture.
Great. Thank you for that. Okay. So Dennis, this question is for you. Can I use NCE status more than once?
Well, so there is some confusion about that, but let me clear one point up. If you get hired with NCE then what happens is after the first year of your employment, you've passed probation, and there's a special authority that allows you to immediately become a competitive service employee. Once you become competitive, once you have competitive status, NCE is irrelevant. So the real question is, what happens when you apply for a job, you're there for 3 months, and you say, oh my gosh, this job is not right for me. I'd rather go here. The question is, can you then use NCE again in that first year? And quite frankly, there's no definitive answer. One of the things that I said earlier on is that federal agencies kind of do what they want to do. And so it's quite possible that a federal agency will accept it, even though they've known that you've come from another federal agency where, and they of course know that, where you were hired based on NCE, or they might say, sorry, you have to apply either through US citizens or you're out of luck. So unfortunately, that was one of the things that we wanted OPM to clarify, which we didn't really get good clarification on. Quite frankly, it doesn't happen very often where people are switching in 1 year's time, but it could.
Okay, thank you for that. That's really helpful. Shireen, do you have a question or two there?
This one is specifically for Hope. Hope, you had talked a little bit about some of these specific diversity efforts, specifically to get people over 50 and 60. So can you talk a little bit about any potential challenges for women who are over 50 when they are applying to jobs, and how they should potentially navigate that?
Well, I don't think the challenges are more for women versus men. First of all, if you're over 50, I would say that, again, the people over 50 are bringing wisdom and experience that can be really very valuable in the workforce. I think some of the mistakes, or some of the is coming in sort of with this attitude about I've been around and I know it, and so on and so forth. So it's just like a cultural adaptation. So you also need to look the part and feel the part of the organization that you're going into. But I don't know that it's a different challenge for women versus men. In fact, it's probably harder for men over 50 than it is for women. But I would say that look the part, think young, and don't act like you know it all, even though you might. So
Great, thank you, Hope. And also, Jody had mentioned that you so generously would be willing to connect with people. How might they get in touch with you?
So the first thing they need to do is make a donation on WPCL. And I think, Jody, am I correct that Jody will contact me and let me know that somebody made a donation, and will tell me who they are, and we'll go from there. So, but the donation to WPCL is really the most critical thing.
And
Jody,
then we'll make the connection right after.
Yeah, Jody, do you want to chime in on that, on the process for that?
Yeah, you just go to the website and you see about making a donation, and it's to one of the 2 awards, or either of the awards, or not, however you want to do it. And then with that, I will connect you with Hope so that you can set up a time to have time together.
So will they, when they make a donation, say, I want an hour with Hope? Is that
Oh, right. Yeah, I forgot about that little detail. Just make a note. I would love to spend time with Hope, and that will happen immediately.
Yeah, that's it.
Great, well, thank you so much. Let's see. The next one is message. This one is for both. How do you define a mid-career professional?
Well, punt that to Dennis.
Well, I guess I would answer that by saying that somebody who's applying for a job that would probably be in the GS 12, 13 range, and that is generally considered full performance level. So in other words, in the federal government, a GS 13 is a full performance level of that particular job series. And that's to go beyond that is the person who's now becoming more expert and or a supervisor of a larger organization as a GS 14 or as a GS 15. So I guess that's what I would probably say.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dennis. And Hope, just from the perspective of private sector, is there a, a time in working professional, or is it more about level?
I guess I don't understand the question. We don't, in terms of levels, so from my perspective, I don't even think about any of those GS things that Dennis is talking
Right.
about. It's completely foreign to me. So if you're making a career switch, it's really, again, what we've talked about understanding where you're going. I mean, I placed a guy who was making well into 7 figures to be a CEO of a state association, because that's where his heart was. And the job paid mid like 150 or something. But that's where his heart was. And he had convinced, the first time he called me, I didn't believe him. So it's not about the level, it's about how you demonstrate your passion.
Okay, great. Thank you, Hope. This question is for Dennis. So just to clarify in terms of utilization of NCE, you can utilize NCE if for competitive service jobs, but if you don't have NCE, you're sort of limited to the public types of jobs. Is that correct?
If it's competitive service, yes, you could only apply if the job is opened to what's called U.S. citizens. It would say U.S. citizens without NCE. And assuming you never had a competitive service job. Obviously, if you did and you had status, then that continues. But if you're going for the very first government job and your NCE is expired, then you're not going to be eligible for that. You'd have to do it for U.S. citizens.
Okay, great. And just to follow up to that, someone had mentioned that they've noticed that there are multiple postings for the same position. So for example, there may be one position and one posting is for current federal employees, whereas there's another one that is open to the public. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Sure. First of all, there's a requirement that really came about for federal employment during the 90s when the federal government was beginning to shrink a little bit, and the thing is called ICTAP, and it stands for Interagency Career Assistance Technical Assistance Program. What it basically does is if somebody is been displaced from a government employee in the competitive service, displaced from a job, agencies must post that job for clearing ICTAP before they can make a selection from outside their workforce. So sometimes what you'll see is the same job being posted for U.S. citizens, another job clearing ICTAP, another job, the same job, excuse me, for competitive service. And what happens there is, as all those people are qualified by the HR office, the HR office sends forward to the selecting official a certificate, and the certificate would be a different certificate for each category of person. And it then allows the selecting official to choose from each or any of those certificates. So for example, if there's a U.S. citizen certificate and there's a competitive service certificate, or there's one for NCE, then they will go to the selecting official, and the selecting official can pick from each individual or a single certificate. It provides the selecting official with some flexibility, as opposed to one single job announcement that includes everybody, which also gets into veterans preference and some other categories. So it's to the employee's advantage if they can fall into any one of the categories.
Okay, great. So you definitely would encourage people if they to apply in that condition with whatever they're qualified for.
Yeah, and they want to, if they have NCE, then they definitely want to apply on an NCE certificate, if an NCE announcement if they can. Otherwise, they're going to be competing with veterans if they've never had government service before.
Great. Okay, thank you, Dennis.
Mhm.
And then I think we have time for just one more question, and this could be for both of you. We had mentioned, I hope you had specifically mentioned that, only 15% of the jobs right now are remote. And so can you, both of you, any of you, talk a little bit about potentially relocation packages for people who are, asked for an in-person job? Are there any particular suggestions or trends that you're seeing?
It's all over the place. I will tell you, depending upon the company. There is no, it's wow. Thinking of all my clients, it's all different. It's all different.
So I guess one thing to sort of say is, would you encourage people to advocate for that if possible?
For relocation?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, but companies will be very set in what they can do. I mean, I think when you say advocate, it's not so much as, if I take this job and you relocate me, this is what I want you to do for me. I think companies are coming to the candidate and saying, this is our relocation policy. And oftentimes it's a lump sum. So it's not, I think if a company is willing to relocate somebody, then they have clearly thought through what it's going to cost and what they're willing to spend for that. So it's probably not something that they necessarily need to advocate for. It will probably have already been thought through, but it is all over the place in terms of what companies are willing to do.
Okay,
So-
great. So from your perspective, it's more like something that will be a clear benefit that's already offered to an employee, rather versus something that they wouldn't particularly need to ask about. Dennis, have you seen anything for government in terms of relocation that you might want to talk about?
Sure. And in fact, there's an easy advantage for that, because when you look at a job announcement, particularly if it indicates that it's remote, it's going to say on that job announcement, relocation expenses not available, or they are. So again, it becomes, as Hope was saying, they're all over the map. Obviously, a lot of it's driven by agencies' budgets, but there's also a determination by the agency well in advance of whether they're going to relocate.
Yeah.
So it is not a consistent approach. There's been some discussion with OMB and OPM about trying to standardize some of this, but I'm not holding my breath for the near term.
Yeah, there will be no standardization in the for-profits. It's all over the place. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much, Dennis and Hope. We really appreciate you taking the time to answer. We do want to now close it out. So I will kick it over to Elizabeth to close us out.
Great. Thank you so much, Shireen. And again, thank you so much to our discussants this evening, Hope and Dennis and Jody, for your facilitation of the discussion, and Shireen for facilitating the questions. I'm sorry that we couldn't get to all of the questions this evening. Some very good ones came up, but we encourage you to reach out, and we'll try and possibly get some of these responses and share them with you at a later date. I just want to take this opportunity to also ask all of you to reach out to your networks and ask them to join Women of Peace Corps Legacy. And for those of them that are members and all of you, please look at sharing some of your time. We know everyone is busy, but we do need some help on a number of committees. And I especially need some help on the mentoring committee to help with, reviewing applications for mentors, applications for mentees, doing the matching, and helping us come up with ideas to help strengthen these relationships. As I said, we are going to be sharing information about the next round of the mentoring program over the next couple of months. And I also encourage all of you to serve as mentors, and we can put you in touch with previous mentors if you'd like to ask questions about the time commitments, the questions that mentees ask, and how the relationship evolves. So with that, I'd like to thank the Women of Peace Corps Legacy Outreach and Events Committee members for all of their support this evening, and the mentoring committee, again, our participants, all of you in our audience, and Jody for your facilitation, and Shireen for your excellent support this evening. Thank you so much, and we hope to see all of you very, very soon. Have a wonderful evening.